Everything's
So at the Smithsonian, when did you start at the British Library?
2000.
In 2000,
Yeah.
so 13 years ago. I remember Lynn came to the Smithsonian Institution to some conference I was at, and wanted to get a good look at this person who was heading up the British Library. And what struck me then was, not just how clear and confident she was. So when you hear her talk about things, but what I've seen over the years is she's actually a doer. She actually makes things happen. So she doesn't just speculate about what the future is, she creates the future. And I think that's an interesting, and just as you were ending up saying we can't stand still, that's not an option, is important to look at. So then let's flash from that first meeting of Lynn that I had to my arrival here at Oxford, which was a little over 6 years ago. And I was invited to one of these wonderful sort of feast dinners at Trinity College, the kind where they send you an invitation in advance and say, if you are going to come, we'll send you a proper invitation. The really fancy invitation. So I went to this dinner, and there were people like Jeremy Irons there, and there were people like Bianca Jagger there, and there were the people who had done the Northern Ireland Peace Prize. And I was seated at the high table as Bodley's librarian. I was immensely surprised, I guess I should say, at the status of librarians here at Oxford as a result. And my two dinner partners, I'll call one Sir TLS, and I'll call the other Mr. Sky Channel, because he had a program on Sky Channel. So they knew one another, and they were leaning across me. I was the library, so I was the topic, and the topic was the British Library. And had the British Library gone to the dogs because they were letting all hoi polloi in. They were letting, everyone was coming in to use it, and, serious researchers couldn't find a seat there. And then Mr. Sky Channel was saying, well, they have tax dollars too. I mean, they should be able to come in and use this resource, as well as the people who are the so-called serious researchers. And I think, for me, that's an illustration of what we are experiencing still today in libraries as we deal with the legacy, the tradition of what a library is and who has been educated and how information is used. And then we're moving into this area of open access, crowdsourcing, much more sort of populist approach. And if you think about other libraries that have been in the headlines, I've tracked the New York Public Library, making the front page of the New York Times, if you still read a paper, about the decision to take the wonderful 42nd Street Library and take the stacks that were created 115 years ago or so, and move books elsewhere and repopulate that with user spaces for the kinds of dynamic interaction that Lynn was describing. And people couldn't really come to grips with the idea that New York's collections could be stored in New Jersey. And that was just beyond the pale to do that. Or it is really a beautiful building. There's a marvelous Scientific American from the 19th century which portrays this as a new building. But, does time stand still? Are there things which stay forever in a certain way, and then we become, I'm always worried when I use the term, are we going to be a museum of the book? Because I think that's insulting to our museum colleagues in a way, because they're always changing. But it just shows how we use these tropes, how we use these words. A library conjures up for people a certain type of space, actually, often a very physical thing. And museum conjures up another image. So you have these experiences, and yet it's as if we are all, you know, there is, you use the word tectonic at one point. I mean, there is this sort of seismic change, this upheaval that is going on as we're redefining ourselves to think more expansively about the word library and what it is. And I used to actually resent the computer scientists for co-opting the word library because in their version of the digital library, because what I really wanted to do was for librarians to redefine the word library so that it would embrace more things. And I think about how do we deal with this conflict between the tradition and innovation, where and Lynne kind of slid into that at the end when she was talking not just about the physical spaces and how they could be used to foster creation and interaction and discourse and outreach, but also it's that not just amplification of the artifact, but it focuses new attention on the artifact by using technology and these new ideas, and so you sort of come full circle, or you have this great circle of relationships. So I do think about that, whether we as research libraries, especially large research libraries, but in my experience it doesn't differ much, whether you're the Warburg or the London Library or the British Library. We all have these stresses between the traditional experience of going to the library, using collections, being in a quiet venue, and having this sort of inspirational but rather solitary experience versus something that is going to be dynamic, interactive, and open. So I think that's going to be the big challenge for us. I want to just point out some other things in Lynne's themes, which were all on this kind of other side of the ledger of the digital acquisitions, the open up legacy collections, open access, big data, discovery and navigation, the MOOCs, then the artifacts and the physical at the end, as I say, sort of rounding that a little bit. But how do we move in that redefinition of ourselves? So let's think at Oxford, where one of the proudest pillars on which our reputation rests is legal deposit. We receive an enormous number of items still weekly on legal deposit, as do 5 other libraries in the country, or in the UK and Ireland, as I'm learning to say. They in this day of access, is it essential to have 6 copies, 6 physical copies? That's one question to ask. And then the next question, as we move into electronic legal deposit, which was celebrated on the 5th of April at the British Library, What does that mean to have electronic legal deposit for any institution really other than the British Library? Because it doesn't have the functionality, the full functionality of an electronic publication. One needs to look at it, one really consults it as if it were a printed item inside the library. It's tethered, it's restricted in that way. And so for me, sometimes I say, well, that's for my successor to worry about. You have to save some challenges for your successor. But to me, it's a watershed moment in the 400 years in which the Bodleian has been a deposit library, and what do we do in the future? And so I think there are very important issues that are arising as a result of these changes, both in our society, in our global world that is highly interactive, that will affect us. And I suppose maybe I don't like to end pessimistically, so, but just to say, when we are these existing institutions of long-standing character, it's sometimes easier to start something new, like the Oxford Internet Institute, or the OERC, or something like that, than it is to try to embrace all of those things within one traditional research library. So that to me is our challenge, is how can we serve, how can we partner with people who have new ways of doing things, being still respectful of the traditions from which we have emanated and which have made us great at our institution, but not so that we are so brittle and inflexible that other people say, well, I can't, they're not nimble enough, I have to go somewhere else to get my information. So that's, I'm posing a question to you as well. Thank you.